At the Long Beach Arena in 1970, 3,000 seats were filled to the back wall for the heavyweight final of the International Karate Championships, the same tournament where the names that mattered in American karate had been building their reputations for the better part of a decade. Bruce Lee was sitting in the third row in a dark jacket and black trousers with his hands resting on his knees. He was 30 years old, a man whose name had been moving through Los Angeles martial arts circles for years in the specific way that names move when the people saying them are not entirely sure whether they are describing a fighter or something else that does not have a clean category yet. Something that does not fit the existing boxes and so keeps falling out of every conversation about it. 1,000 people had applauded when his name was read out before the finals, and Bruce had nodded once and sat back down. No one in that arena knew they were about to witness history. They did not know that the winner of the heavyweight final was about to walk to the microphone after the bell and call Bruce Lee out in front of 3,000 people. They did not know that what was about to happen in the next 3 minutes would change the way an entire generation of fighters thought about what martial arts actually was and what it was actually for. His name was Dolph Lundgren, 22 years old, 6 FT5 in 245 lb, the reigning European Kyokushin champion, and undefeated in full contact competition for 2 years. By every measurable standard in the arena that afternoon, he was the most physically dangerous human being in the building. What happened in the next 3 minutes would change the way an entire generation of fighters thought about karate. Dolph had flown in on a Swedish Karate Federation invitation, blonde and blue-eyed, and built the way men are built when they have been training since they were 13 and lifting since they were 15. He had taken the European title in Budapest 4 months earlier, and he spoke English with a Swedish accent that made every word land a little harder than it needed to. He had the specific quality that very large, very strong, very young, undefeated fighters carry with them into every room they enter, which is the quality of someone who has not yet been shown the thing their particular set of tools cannot solve, and who has therefore not yet had to develop the ability to think beyond those tools. He did not know this about himself. Nobody who has that quality ever does. That is precisely what makes the quality what it is. Bruce had watched him from the third row with the same expression he wore for everything. Dolph had fought through the bracket all day, 3 matches and 3 knockouts. The third one, the semifinal against a 230 lb Tang Soo Do fighter out of Houston, had ended in 19 seconds with a roundhouse kick that the people in the front rows heard before they saw. The Tang Soo Do fighter had been carried off the mat by his own corner, and the arena had gone quiet for a moment in the particular way an arena goes quiet when it has just watched something that sits at the edge of what the rules are designed to contain. The final paired Dolph against Mike Stone Jr., a 6'2" American Kyokushin practitioner out of San Diego, who was the only other man in the bracket who'd not lost a round. The match lasted 1 minute and 40 seconds and ended with Dolph winning by knockout. And when the bell rang, the crowd made the polite and slightly unsettled sound a crowd makes when it has just watched someone be hurt badly and is not sure whether it should be celebrating or looking away. Ed Parker walked the trophy out, 3F'd of chrome and walnut, and he handed it to Dolph and turned to walk back to the announcer's stand. But Dolph did not bow and he did not walk off the mat. He took the microphone from the announcer's stand at the edge of the floor, and the arena quieted because 3,000 people in a room understand without being told when something has shifted. The winner of a tournament is not supposed to take the microphone. The winner of a tournament is supposed to bow to the trophy, raise it for the photographers, and walk off so the next event can begin. The fact that Dolph was holding the microphone meant that something else was about to happen, and 3,000 people sat forward in their seats because they wanted to know what it was. His voice came through the speakers, and at first he thanked Ed Parker. He thanked the Swedish Karate Federation. He thanked the American hosts for inviting him. He said the right things for about 45 seconds, and then he said something else. He said that in Sweden and in Europe, they fought full contact every match, every training session, real punches and real kicks and real fighting. He said that what he had seen in America and the tournaments he had attended that week was something different. He had seen point karate. He had seen tournaments where their referees stopped the fight because somebody had touched somebody, and that, as said, was not fighting. That was dancing. The arena noise level changed. Not boos, not yet, but a low murmur instead. 1,000 people simultaneously realizing where this was going. He kept talking. He said that he had heard about Chinese Kung Fu. He said he'd heard it described as the most complete fighting system in the world. He said he had heard a particular name mentioned with a particular reverence that he found difficult to reconcile with what he had actually seen in competition. He said the name was Bruce Lee. He said he had seen the television program. He had watched the episodes the previous week. He said it had been very nice and very Hollywood. The pause did its work. Television, he said, was not fighting. A man who moved quickly in front of cameras on a studio set was not the same thing as a man who could fight. And a man who had spent his career teaching and demonstrating and performing was not the same thing as a man who had spent his career competing. Then he turned, and he did not have to look for the third row because he had known exactly where Bruce Lee was sitting since he had walked out for the final. He pointed not at the section, but at the man, and he said, "Bruce Lee, you are here, I am here. I have the trophy. I am 22 years old, European champion, full contact, and I think one round is too much for you. I will give you 3 minutes. Come down. Show 3,000 people what Chinese Kung Fu really is." The arena made the noise that 3,000 people make. When something has just become a story, they are going to tell for the rest of their lives. Not cheering, not booing, but a specific kind of collective intake of breath that is the sound of 3,000 people realizing at the same instant that what is happening in front of them has just stopped being normal. Ed Parker was already moving across the mat with the expression of a tournament director who had lost control of his tournament. The man beside Bruce was leaning over and saying something low and urgent into his ear, and the cameras at the back of the arena were pointed at the third row. Every person in the building had turned to look at the man in the dark jacket, sitting with his hands resting on his knees. Bruce had not moved. His face had not changed. He looked at Dolph the way he looked at everything in a martial arts arena, which was without surprise. He had heard things like this before, not in arenas, not always, but in the particular social situations that Martial Arts in Los Angeles in 1970 produced, where someone who had been training for 2 years and someone who had been training for 20 years ended up in the same room, and the person who had been training for 2 years felt the need to establish something. The specific thing they felt the need to establish was always the same thing. Bruce had seen it enough times that it no longer surprised him at the level of event. It interested him only at the level of the human tendency that kept producing it reliably. Everywhere, across every style and every background, the same pattern. He said one thing to the man beside him quietly, and only that man heard it. He said, "He has already lost, he just does not know it yet." Then he stood up. The noise in the arena rose higher than ever before when Bruce stood up, and then dropped too. Nothing when he stepped over the low barrier between the third row and the competition floor. The arena went silent, the way arenas go silent when something is happening that nobody wants to interrupt by making a sound. He walked across the mat in his dark jacket and his black trousers. No guy, no belt, street shoes. He stopped at the edge of the competition area and took off the jacket and folded it once and set it on the barrier. Underneath, he was wearing a black training top. He removed his shoes and set them beside the jacket. He walked barefoot in his black trousers to the center of the mat. He stopped 8 FT from Dolph and looked up because Dolph was 7 in taller, and he waited. The waiting was not theatrical. It was not performed patience or performed calm. It was the waiting of someone who has nothing to prove to the room and is simply standing in the room until the next thing happens. The 3,000 people in the arena watched him wait and understood. Most of them, without being able to name what they understood, that the man standing barefoot in black trousers in the center of the mat was not the smaller man in this situation in any sense that actually mattered. Ed Parker had been in martial arts long enough to know that some challenges, once issued in front of 3,000 people, cannot be ignored without consequence. He stepped to the microphone. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, unscheduled exhibition, 3 minutes, 1 round, full contact, Dolph Lundgren, European Kyokushin champion versus Bruce Lee." The crowd noise doubled. Parker raised his hand. He said, "Fight." Dolph came forward immediately, the way Kyokushin fighters come forward, which is straight, front kick, full weight behind it. The same kick that had ended the semi-final in 19 seconds. Bruce was not there. He had moved at a 45-degree angle inside this kicking range before Dolph's foot reached the place where Bruce had been. His right hand was chambered before Dolph's planted foot had even touched the mat again. He did not throw it, he reset. The next 90 seconds were Dolph hunting and Bruce reading. Dolph threw everything that had worked for him in Europe for 2 years. The lead leg roundhouse, the spinning back kick, the punch-punch low kick combination that had ended the semi-final. None of them landed clean. Bruce checked the low kicks without backing up. He slipped the punches by rotating his shoulders maybe 3 or 4 inches. He never threw anything back. Minute 30. Dolph was breathing, Bruce was not. The 3,000 people in the arena had gone from confused to silent to leaning forward. They were watching a 5'7" 138L man in black trousers make a 22-year-old European champion look like he was fighting underwater. The confusion in the arena was a specific kind of confusion, not the confusion of people who did not understand what they were seeing. The confusion of people who understood exactly what they were seeing and could not reconcile it with what they had believed was possible before they saw it. The judges at the side of the mat had stopped pretending to take notes. They were just watching. What the more experienced people in the building were seeing was something it takes years of training to see clearly. A fight is not just two men hitting each other. A fight is a negotiation about distance. Every martial art on earth makes assumptions about what distance the fight will happen at. Kyokushin assumes the fight will happen close, where punches and knees and roundhouse kicks at chest and head height can land with full body weight behind them. Bruce had spent 15 years of his life developing control of the distance that's exactly half a step outside that range. The range where a side kick or a straight punch can reach across the gap before any Kyokushin combination can close it. The 3,000 people in the arena were watching a man who had spent his life learning to own that exact gap, demonstrating what owning it looked like against a man who needed the gap to close in order for anything he knew to function. What they were watching was not a mismatch in size or strength or conditioning. What they were watching was a mismatch in understanding. Dolph understood fighting at the level of technique. Bruce understood it at the level of geometry. Technique operates inside a set of assumptions. Geometry defines what assumptions are available. The 3,000 people in that arena were watching what happens when someone who spent 15 years understanding the geometry of a situation meets someone who has spent 2 years mastering the technique that the geometry was designed to make irrelevant. 2 minutes. Dolph committed to the kick he had been holding back, left leg roundhouse, head height. The same kick that had ended the Tang Soo Do fighter from Houston. Bruce did not duck under it. He stepped into it. He caught Dolph's leg at the ankle with his left hand while it was still extended, dropped his weight, and swept Dolph's planted leg with a side kick to the back of the knee. Dolph went down on his back, hard, with the sound a 245 la body makes when it hits canvas after falling 3F. Bruce was already stepping back, hands open at his sides, not a single strike thrown in 2 minutes. Dolph got up. The 3,000 people in the arena made a noise. He came forward again, angrier now, faster. The technique starting to fragment the way technique fragments when a fighter has been embarrassed and is trying to compensate. Right cross, Bruce slipped it. Left hook, Bruce slipped it. Knee, Bruce checked it with a knee of his own. The only real contact he had initiated in the entire encounter, and the sound of the two knees meeting was the loudest thing in the arena for half a second. Dolph staggered back 1 step. What was happening to Dolph in those moments was something that happens to every fighter. Eventually, if they fight long enough and seriously enough, which is the experience of encountering someone who is operating according to a different set of rules from the rules you have been using, and discovering this not in a training session where the discovery can be absorbed gradually and privately, but in front of 3,000 people in the space of 120 seconds in a way that is completely public and completely unambiguous and completely impossible to explain away. 2 minutes 30, Bruce had not thrown a punch or a kick in 2 minutes. He threw one now, the right hand, the hand that people who had trained with him over the years consistently described afterward using language that tended toward the inadequate, because what they were trying to describe was something that their eyes had been open for and had not fully recorded. He pulled it at the last instant. The knuckles landed flat against Dolph's chest with the force of a hard push rather than the force of a strike, but Dolph was already moving forward when it landed, his own weight committed to a step that Bruce had read 3/4 of a second before. Dolph had begun to take it. Bruce's pushing hand, plus Dolph's own forward momentum, plus the exact wrong angle for Dolph's center of gravity to absorb the contact was enough. Dolph went down on one knee. He did not fall from the force of the strike. He fell from the geometry. A hand-sized point of contact had redirected 245 vol to a forward motion at exactly the angle that 245 volts of forward motion could not stay standing through. He stayed on the knee, he looked up, Bruce had already turned halfway and was walking back to the center of the mat. He stopped. He turned back. He extended his hand down to the man on the floor. The bell rang. Minutes. Dolph took the hand. Bruce pulled him to his feet. They stood facing each other in the center of the mat with 3,000 people watching them and not making a sound. Bruce said something. He said it quietly enough that only Dolph and the referee heard it. The referee would later tell people that Bruce had said something to Dolph that was meant for Dolph and not for the building, and that he, the referee, would not be repeating it. What we know that Bruce said, because Dolph himself would describe the substance of it years later, was something to this effect. He said, "You already know how to fight." He said, "You have been doing this since you were 13 and it shows in everything you do, and it will always show." He said, "The day you stop performing for the man across from you and start watching him is the day you get there." He nodded once. He picked up his jacket from the barrier. He picked up his shoes and carried them in his left hand. He walked off the mat in his bare feet, in his black trousers. The 3,000 people in the arena stood up. They were not cheering, they were applauding. The specific applause of a crowd that has just understood it, has watched a teacher and not a fighter. The applause was not the applause that follows a victory. Was the applause that follows a demonstration of something that the audience did not know it was going to be shown and recognizes in the moment of being shown it as something it needed to see. The applause continued as Bruce walked across the floor of the arena and disappeared into the corridor that led to the it continued for some time after he had gone. Backstage, Dolph sat down on a wooden bench. Ed Parker brought him a paper cup of water. The two of them did not speak for a long time. Bruce had already left the arena. He had walked out the side exit to the parking lot and driven himself home alone in the same car he had driven in. There was no press conference. There was no comment. The next morning's Los Angeles Times sports section gave the exhibition 4 lines on page 7 and got 2 of the 4 wrong. The Times reporter had not been at ringside. He had filed from a phone in the press box during the heavyweight final. He had written an account of something he had not seen, which produced exactly the kind of account you would expect an account of something the writer had not seen to produce. The 4 lines contained the names of the 2 participants and a description of the outcome that was technically accurate in its broad outlines and completely wrong in every particular that made the broad outlines mean anything. It did not matter. The story spread anyway. The way these stories spread, it traveled through dojos, through bus eat meters, through phone calls between black belts in different cities, through the particular grapevine that connected serious martial artists in 1970, the way the internet connects them now. Within a month, every kung fu and karate school in California had heard some version of it. Most of the versions got the details wrong. The 3,000 people who had actually been there agreed on the essential ones. A 22-year-old European champion had taken a microphone he should not have taken and called out a 30-year-old man in the 3rd row in front of 3,000 people. The man in the 3rd row had stood up out of his seat in his dark jacket and his street shoes and walked onto the mat without a GI, without a belt, without saying anything at all about what he was about to do. He had spent 2 minutes letting the European hit nothing but air. He had thrown exactly 1 strike. He had not landed it with damaging force. He had pulled the European to his feet at the end of it with the same hand he'd used to send the European down. He had said something to the European that nobody else heard. Then he had walked off in his bare feet and gone home. Dolph Lundgren went back to Stockholm. He defended his European title in 1972. He stopped competing in 1973. He moved through different worlds in the years that followed, each one building on the last in ways that would not have been predictable from the outside. He became Grace Jones's bodyguard in New York. He went to MIT on a Fulbright scholarship to study chemical engineering. He got cast as Ivan Drago in Rocky IV in 1985, and the world learned his name. He never spoke publicly about what had happened in Long Beach for many years. When he did speak about it, he spoke about it the way a man speaks about an event that taught him something he could not have learned any other way. He said that it had been the most instructive 3 minutes of his competitive life. He said that what he had learned in those 3 minutes had taken him years to fully understand, and that he was not certain he had finished understanding it even now. He said that he had walked onto that mat certain of several things and had walked off it uncertain of all of them, and that the uncertainty had turned out to be more valuable than the certainty had ever been. He said that Bruce Lee had not humiliated him. He was careful about that. He said that was the wrong word for what had happened. The right word, he said after a long pause, was educated. Bruce Lee never spoke about it at all. He had a principle dating back to his earliest training days about not commenting on encounters that were over. The principle was that the encounter contained whatever it contained, and saying anything else about it afterward diluted what had happened. He kept the principle for the rest of his life. He was asked about the Long Beach exhibition many times in the years that followed. He always answered the same way. He would nod slightly and say that he remembered the tournament. He would say that Dolph had been a fine young fighter. He would change the subject. This was consistent with everything else about how he operated. He did not look back at things that were finished. He looked at what was in front of him, which was the habit that had produced everything he was, and which he maintained with exactly the consistency you would expect from someone for whom the habit was not a discipline, but simply the way things were. What happened on that mat in Long Beach was not a fight in the usual meaning of the word. There had been no winner declared. The judges had not scored it. Nobody had been hurt. The exhibition lasted 3 minutes and produced a single intentional point of contact between the two men. By the conventional metrics of a martial arts contest, almost nothing had occurred. By the metrics that matter to the people who actually train, everything had occurred. What had occurred was a lesson taught by a man who did not raise his voice and did not throw a single full power strike to a young man who needed to learn it. The lesson was a simple one, but it is one of those lessons that is simple to state and takes a lifetime to absorb. Technique is not enough, confidence is not enough, conditioning is not enough, youth is not enough, size is not enough. What you need in the end is the thing the smaller man had and the larger man had not yet built, which is the ability to see what is in front of you instead of what you have decided is going to be in front of you. The younger man had walked onto that mat seeing a 30-year-old television actor in a dark jacket. The older man had walked onto it seeing a 22-year-old who was already great and would be greater and who needed to learn one specific thing before he could become what he was capable of becoming. Only one of those two men was looking at what was actually there. The whole encounter was contained in that fact, and the whole encounter played out exactly the way the fact required it to play out. This is not a complicated observation. It is one of the simplest observations there is about what fighting is and what it requires. It is also one of the hardest things to actually do, because doing it requires giving up the thing that feels most like an advantage in the moments before a contest begins, which is the certainty that you already know how this is going to go. That certainty is comfortable. It is also in the presence of someone who is actually watching rather than deciding the most reliable path to the floor. The 3,000 people in the Long Beach arena that Saturday afternoon went home and told their wives and husbands and training partners about what they had seen. The story moved out from there. It changed shape as it traveled. It got bigger in some versions and smaller in others. It dropped one detail and picked up another. The essential thing in all the versions was always the same. There had been a man sitting quietly in the third row. He had stood up when his name had been used the wrong way. He had walked to the center of the mat without taking his jacket off until he got there. In 3 minutes, without raising his voice, without landing a single strike at full power, he had reminded everyone in that arena of something that is easy to forget when you are young and large and undefeated. The difference between fighting a man and watching a man is the difference between losing and winning. Anyone willing to step onto a mat on a Saturday afternoon in front of 3,000 people who know what they are looking at can find that difference out. It does not take long. It took Dolph Lundgren 3 minutes. It changed his life. He has been carrying what he learned in those 3 minutes with him in one way or another every day since. The mat had said everything that needed to be said. It had said it in 3 minutes. It had said it completely.